Hi, Steven Stahlberg here with another tutorial video. This time I plan to do something that's half movie poster fan art and half pinup, although I'll add the topless part after this tutorial is done. Two characters from a classic cult movie, Flash Gordon from 1980. The best soundtrack ever, great performances by a whole slew of top actors except for Flash himself, of course. The two most unforgettable ones were Ornella Muti as Princess Aura and Max von Sydow as Emperor Ming the Merciless, her hypnotically evil father. I'll put these two off to the side. I'm going to use them as references, but they didn't fit in the window. I decided to place her in the foreground with more curves than Ornella herself had at the time, and the giant ghostly Ming looking down on her from behind with a sadistic and sarcastic smile, as you saw in the reference. As in previous tutorial videos, I'm just sketching with a pen-like tool. It doesn't matter what kind of a pen-like tool you use, what kind of a brush here, because it's not going to be this time. Actually, earlier I did include the brush strokes in some of the earlier tutorials, but this time they're not going to be incorporated into the final image at all. So I'm not being terribly careful about the thickness and weight and what they exactly look like, if I make a mistake or not. Now I'm just saving it. Remember to save often. I've been caught by that mistake many times. I decided on using a red background because the color red seems to be Ming's color, or one of them, gold, red, black. And in this particular reference shot, in the scene where Ornella is wearing this costume, the background is a bright red. I'm done drawing aura and I am adjusting the drawing using warp, liquefy sometimes, not this time maybe, but scale, skew, there's warp again. Trying to exaggerate the contrapposto, which means the way that her hips are slanted one way and her shoulders are slanted the other way. And also trying to exaggerate her curves for a exaggerated effect, for a comic, cartoony sort of pin-up effect. When it came to her costume, I actually missed 3 gold chains, very thin golden chains that are hanging down from around her neck. One longer one down the center of her torso and 2 more on the sides. I added them in after this tutorial was done. The reference photo wasn't that high res, so I missed them. There's the red color. And now I'm, like before, like in previous tutorials, I am selecting areas that are going to be placed on their own respective layers, which you will see. One for the body, which will include the face, and one that is called gold, which will be basically all parts of her that aren't her skin are gold, so that's fairly easy. It's basically just 2 layers for her, except for the fact that her arm is on top of some of the gold, so therefore there had to be a 3rd layer for her arm, separately from her body. That one arm that is touching her chin. This is a brush that I found in Photoshop, just modified it slightly. I can't remember exactly what I did to it. I think I just set a size to it and maybe some parameter, tweaked 1 or 2 parameters. I have one that goes sideways and another one that goes vertical, which you will see later. This right here is actually the most fun part for me. I just did the arm layer, and here comes the gold layer. And perhaps you noticed I wasn't very careful with the outline outside. When the outline crosses into the red area, it doesn't matter, because what you do is you copy and paste, and then you lock the layer. So that part doesn't really catch any color later when you paint on it, as you can see here. Sometimes you may have to unlock the layer. That happens to me a lot. I've made a mistake with the selection or whatever, and I have to I have to add maybe perhaps a small piece to that layer. And so, it goes off and on, but you gotta keep your eye on it. And another thing that happens a lot to me is that I forget that I unlock the layer, and I start painting and I see paint going everywhere it's not supposed to. But such is life. It's hard for me to keep track of everything, all these technical details when I'm in the zone, painting away like a madman. I keep hiding my selections too, and then I always forget what part is selected and what part is not selected. I don't paint with black on skin to create a shadow on skin. As you can see, I'm painting with a very reddish sort of dark brown. There was a bit of black there, but as you also saw, I used the fade tool to fade it out. Now, having established the dark reddish brown parts, I go in with black. It's not a good idea though to start straight off with the black, because you might be tempted to use the black to create the shadows across the surface of the skin, and it will look gray and dead if you do that. If you use pure black, for instance, in an airbrush. You see, this color here is quite reddish that I'm using on the nose, and later on I even more red. I'm going to add even more red to that area in the face. Now there's a thin black line there, but I'm going to paint on top of it later, and it's only a very thin one. You can use some black like this. You can see I'm covering up the black after the fact. So just a very little black remains after I'm done. See, I'm covering it up there. You have to be very careful. I had huge problems with this in the first couple of videos I made for this in this series of videos. I think all this practice I've been doing, all this hard work is paying off. I'm getting a little better at drawing faces, sculpting them in perspective like this. Because I am really, I really have been doing a lot of work in this series of tutorials. Basically, I'm drawing and painting all my spare time now. I'm doing the gold on the headpiece a little bit differently than I'm going to do the rest of the body. Here I'm putting the highlights directly on the same layer as the rest of the gold. I'm selecting just the headpiece, and now I'm playing around with the curves to darken everything else except the highlights a little bit. And then I'm still adding darker tones where they should go. Now for the rest of the costume, I'm going to start off by putting the highlights on a separate layer, which I think worked a little better. It was more manageable anyway. Here I think I'm using screen and a brush that is called splatter, which adds little spots of brightness here and there. I added them on another layer so that I could strengthen them before I applied them. Now here you see what what I was talking about when I'm doing adding the selection, which is going to be the highlights. And this was a very tedious process. So about halfway through, when we get down to, oh, I don't know, roughly the thigh or somewhere, I'm going to there's a little cut where I switched off the recording just to finish the rest of the leg because it was taking so long. By the way, this is speeded up at 999%, basically 1000%, which is basically 10 times faster than normal. Yeah, there was the jump. I just did the whole rest of the leg real quick there. And now I'm underneath the highlight, painting with a sort of a medium brown. I guess you could call it a darker gold color. By the way, all the gold here is too red right now, and I made it less reddish later on in this tutorial, but even after the tutorial I continued to dull it down. I brought the color more towards the green. Now that doesn't mean that I made the color actual greenish. It's just that you take a reddish color and you make it more neutral. You compare before and after side by side, and it looks like you just made it slightly greener. You didn't add green to it, you just took out some red, and that's what I'm going to be doing in several stages here. You can see the orangey parts are way too orange, of course. Uh, Something which I'm already aware of, but I can't really fix it right now because that layer is set to overlay. And I liked other things that did, so I wanted to keep it that way. So I decided that I would later drop it down, because you can't really change much when the overlay is just an overlay, you know, because the orange isn't really there. It's just a fairly light color, like almost white, like ivory or something. And when that is overlaid on top of the basic gold color that you see there, you get orange. Now, I could have tried some other strategy to make the gold, but this worked. I later got rid of the orange, although it is annoying me now to look at it. Here I'm trying to add a little bit of reddishness back in, which may have been a mistake, but I was thinking that the environment is so red that it should be reflected. It should have, you know, some small reflections in the shiny gold. You see how it looks sort of greenish, bluish cyan, where you make, that's just gray. That's not green or blue. That's just gray. And it's our eyes tricking us. I'm adding some highlights now. This is a bit too strong, but I faded it out later. This layer is set to color dodge, which is a cool effect when it comes to metals. It works very well for highlights on metals. Adding some darkness in there too. When it comes to shiny metal, you need to have the brights really bright and the darks fairly dark, and they need to be right juxtaposed next to each other in many cases, many places. Again, as usual, if you have any questions, let me know and I'll be glad to do my best to try and answer them. Here's that brush I mentioned earlier. It's just the very same brush that I used in the background, except it's flipped 90 degrees. And then in a little while I'm going to get another brush which has a very large and fine-grained sort of noise texture on it, and create a sort of a glittery sort of a golden. There it is. Now you won't see much there. I put on 2 or 3 different tones there, medium, dark, and then bright, and then now I went and used the sharpen, unmask sharpen tool, and if you put the setting right, there are only 2 settings. One is how many pixels wide, so you can go to from below 1 pixel, which will be like 0.5, 0.6, 0.7 I usually use, or you can go bigger than a pixel for certain effects, but I rarely do that. And then there's the strength, and after that I use the fade tool just to see. It sort of gives me a second chance to see, to dial it in and to see if I made the right choice. Adding a couple of bits here that I discovered that I'd missed before. Adding some sprinkles. Sprinkles are for winners. This is the shadow layer, which I just copied the gold and made it quite dark, as you saw. Moved it down a couple of pixels and blurred it a little bit so that it's sort of like a cast shadow. It's a drop shadow. It's very subtle. You only see it close up, but it's necessary. It seats the gold onto the skin in a much better way than without it. It just looks fake, like the gold is just floating on a separate layer in Photoshop. I suppose if you blurred the edges of the selection on that layer, you might get a similar effect, but it's just easier to do it this way. Now I'm working on the skin. Again, I try not to use black unless absolutely necessary. These are those golden chains that I mentioned earlier. Actually, I still made a mistake here. It's supposed to continue down below the bikini top, but I didn't see that at the time. It doesn't matter. We can pretend it got tangled up inside the bikini or something. Yeah, I forgot the layer was unlocked there. So undo, 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 and redo. Later I will, I think after the tutorial is over, I did move that dress a little bit to the left. Just because it's possible that it's fully masking the other leg there like that, but I thought it just looked a little bit too I don't know, too close. You try to avoid uh, accidental tangents like that, so I moved it over. Also, another thing that a lot of artists do, because it's true, is coloring the knees and the toes and the hands more red than the rest of the skin. Is something that is done very often, especially in pin-ups. And now the final pass on Emperor Ming himself. You can see he's wearing a little bit of makeup. He's wearing eyeshadow and eyeliner, which is cool, you know. If you're the emperor, you know, you want to look your best, and who's gonna complain? Max von Sydow is one of my most favorite actors ever. I've seen him in many different things, many different movies, TV shows, TV series. Okay, and here is the final image. As you can see, the gold is a little greener, as I said, quote unquote greener, less red. I moved the dress a little bit to the left. I signed it, and the topless version will be available for download from the Patreon site by popular request. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you for my next one.